People say instincts can't be taught, especially to someone like me. That's what Staff Sergeant Givens muttered to the other instructors when I stepped onto the firing line for the first time. Women hesitate, he said. They get too caught up in mechanics. Not built for this kind of thing. I didn't say a word. I was Specialist Aria Holt then, 24 years old, barely 2 months into infantry training at Camp Ridgewell, a base tucked into the edge of the Appalachian foothills. Born and raised in Laramie, Montana, where the winters froze your bones and missed shots meant dead cattle or worse. My world had been all fences, rifles, and early sunrises before I ever laced a combat boot. They didn't know that my father, Caleb Holt, was a Marine sniper before he ever taught me how to skin an elk, that I had pulled the trigger on more rifles than most of these instructors had names for. But none of that mattered here. In the Army, past experience didn't count, only performance. And I planned to let mine speak loud. I kept quiet during training, even when they asked about firearms experience. I didn't raise my hand. I didn't volunteer anything. I just watched, took notes, learned their cadence, their priorities, the unspoken rules. I followed orders, kept my locker squared away, passed every written test with near-perfect scores. And every night, after lights out, I'd sit on my bunk and replay every drill in my head until I could spot the flaws without blinking. I didn't come here to prove a point. I came because my father told me something once that stuck. You only get one shot to change how people see you. Make sure it's clean. My shot came on a cold morning during our qualification range. Final week before graduation. 36 pop-up targets, from 50 meters to 300. 40 rounds. 23 hits minimum to pass. The entire company, just under 100 of us, lined the bleachers, watching every soldier step up one at a time. It was a show. Always was. Givens ran the range that day, like he always did. Tall, square-jawed, with a buzz cut so sharp it looked like he shaved it with sandpaper. He ran a tight operation, but he made no effort to hide what he thought of women in combat roles. Never said anything reportable, just enough snide remarks and second glances to get his point across. I was in the second firing group, standing behind the line, helmet clipped, gloves on, waiting. That's when he called me forward. Specialist Holt, he barked. Step up. I did. I reached for the assigned M4 on the rack, performed my function check, and slung it. Givens stopped me with a raised hand. Hold up, he said. Let's show the company what a poorly maintained weapon looks like. He grabbed the rifle from me and held it up like it was diseased. Looked it over for all of 5 seconds before declaring, unsafe. Disqualified. Then, in one smooth, showy motion, he dropped to one knee and drove the handguard against it. Snapped the polymer with a loud crack. I stood there, silent. You want to handle a weapon? He said, voice loud for the crowd. Then respect the basics. Otherwise, you're just playing dress up. Someone near the bleachers let out a low whistle. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I just asked one thing. Can I borrow your rifle, Sergeant? The silence that followed felt like the air itself had stopped moving. He stared at me for a long time. Then, almost grinning, he unslung his personal M4, a custom job, zeroed to his specs, and handed it over like a dare. You miss more than 3, he said. You're getting recycled. I nodded, took the rifle, walked to the line. No drama. No speeches. The optic was a red dot, CCO style, bright and centered. Zeroed for his height, his eye relief, his shoulder angle. I'd have to adjust mentally, but I'd done worse with borrowed rifles back home. The wind was steady, just under 6 miles an hour cross, nothing I couldn't hold for. I felt the breath settle into my ribs. Thought about my dad. About every coyote I ever dropped from 200 yards with a lever action and no rest. The range officer called the line hot. I dropped to prone. Red dot up. Target at 50 meters popped. 2 rounds, clean center. Then another. And another. They kept coming. I kept shooting. By the time I moved to 200 meters, the bleachers were silent. They always are when the narrative starts to shift. By the time I hit the 200-meter mark, my whole body had fallen into the rhythm my dad taught me years ago. Breath in, pause at the natural respiratory pause, squeeze. No anticipation, no flinch. The recoil was minor, but the rhythm, that was everything. That's what carried me through 3 more target sets, each further and tighter spaced than the last. I could feel Givens' rifle wanting to pull just a touch right. His sling tension was higher than mine, and the optics sat a bit high for my cheek weld. But I'd compensated by the third shot. Held just left of center and trusted the glass. Let the dot float like it was part of my heartbeat. Behind me, not a single voice stirred. Even the drill sergeants were quiet now. There's a point in every qualification when you stop being someone shooting a rifle and become someone performing something people can't explain. I felt that moment hit right before the 300-meter targets popped. They appeared slow, far, almost ghostly. Just silhouettes, barely visible. I dropped into supported prone, wedged my ruck under the handguard like I'd done 100 times in Wyoming, and let my exhale carry each shot like it was the only thing that mattered. 35 targets in, I hadn't missed once. Drill Sergeant Kessler, one of the quieter instructors, walked over with a pair of binoculars. His lips didn't move, but his eyes narrowed behind the glass. Givens stayed near the far side of the line, arms crossed, face unreadable. He wasn't yelling anymore. I dropped the final target with a single shot. The clang echoed against the range wall like punctuation. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was stunned. Like the air had been slapped still. "Cease fire," the range officer called out. I stood, cleared the rifle, locked the bolt to the rear, and waited for the scorer. He came over slow, like he didn't want to say what he already knew. 40 out of 40, he said. Perfect qual. Kessler took the score sheet, turned to the company, and raised it over his head without a word. That was all it took. The bleachers, once packed with dismissive grins and quiet mutters, were now filled with eyes trying not to blink. I walked off the line, handed Givens his rifle. He took it without looking at me. Didn't say thank you. Didn't say anything at all. Just nodded once, sharp, curt, and turned back to the line. He never made eye contact again. Later that afternoon, we were called to an impromptu company formation. Command Sergeant Major Darby stood out front. He wasn't the type to do speeches unless something mattered. He looked at the company, then at me, and said, "Specialist Holt has set the mark for this cycle. Highest score on the qualification range. That is what right looks like. No excuses. No rumors. Just facts." He didn't mention Givens. Didn't have to. I could feel the air around me shift. Not just respect, but caution. The kind that said, "We got that wrong." The kind that reminded them I didn't need to raise my voice to make a point. My shooting did it for me. And when I walked back to the barracks that night, the girls in my bay were waiting. No questions. Just nods. One of them, Perez, gave me a thumbs up and said, "Thanks for that. You made space for the rest of us." I didn't say much back. Just smiled. Because I wasn't doing this to prove something for them. I was doing it for the one person who always believed I could. My father once told me that a clean shot says everything a speech never could. That day, I made my statement. And it echoed. The next morning, things were different. Not louder, just sharper. Drill sergeants didn't bark when I passed anymore. They watched, measured, like they were recalibrating something they'd thought was already settled. Givens didn't speak to me once during PT, but Staff Sergeant Kessler gave me a nod after the run. Just a quiet acknowledgement. In this place, that was a speech. By lunchtime, word had spread through the entire battalion. Some of the girls in other platoons came to find me at the chow hall. Not to crowd around, just to say things like, "Saw you shoot yesterday," or "Heard what happened." The tone was the same. Not surprise, respect. They knew what that shot had cost. Because it always costs something. The instructors didn't say much about the rifle Givens broke, but I overheard 2 supply clerks talking later. Said the serial number had been flagged. That a report of survey was already in motion. That someone, most likely Givens, was going to be held accountable for destroying government property. They were careful about how they said it, but I caught the meaning. He'd stepped over a line, and command was taking notice. That afternoon, Sergeant Major Darby visited our bay. He asked to speak to me in private. We walked to the empty common room, where he stood with his hands behind his back and looked at me like I was a puzzle he finally understood. "You didn't argue. You didn't raise your voice. You just shot. That's rare." I didn't know what to say, so I stayed quiet. He went on. "Performance matters in this field. Always has. But sometimes, it takes moments like yesterday to remind people what that actually looks like." I nodded. Then he added something I didn't expect. "There's a leadership development slot open for this cycle. I'm putting your name forward." That hit harder than I expected. Not because I was chasing stripes, but because it meant someone upstairs didn't just see a lucky shot. They saw what it represented. He told me the paperwork would start by next week. That night, I pulled the old photo from the bottom of my footlocker. Me and Dad, standing on the ridge behind our ranch, snow up to our knees, both of us holding rifles. He had this crooked smile, like he knew something the world hadn't caught up with yet. I kept that photo folded behind a letter he'd written me before I left. "You won't have to shout to be heard," he wrote. "You'll just have to do the work when no one's watching, and then be ready when they finally look." I hadn't cried once since I got to Ridgewell. But that night, I let a few tears hit my bunk before lights out. Not because I was sad, because I knew he'd be proud. And that mattered more than any commendation. By the end of the week, the rumors stopped being whispers. The platoon knew. The battalion knew. Even a few instructors from outside our company stopped me during equipment draw to shake my hand or say, "Good work on the range." I took every one of those compliments like I took my shooting, steady, without gloating. Because I also knew not everyone was happy about it. Respect in the infantry isn't always unanimous. Sometimes it's grudging. Sometimes it comes with a side of resentment, especially when it rewrites the story people already decided was true. The story that women were barely keeping up. The story that we didn't belong here, not really. I didn't ask for the spotlight. But now that it had found me, I had to carry it like weight on my back. One slip, one missed drill, one late wake-up, and the whispers would start again. See, just a fluke. She got lucky. They're always looking for a reason to turn belief back into doubt. So I trained harder. I ran extra laps before breakfast, carried more gear than anyone else during ruck marches, asked for double checks during weapons maintenance even when mine were spotless. And when the leadership development program pulled me in for a trial mentorship rotation, I didn't ask for less, only more. I got paired with Sergeant First Class Malcolm, a wiry, no-nonsense leader who deployed 6 times and looked at everything through narrowed eyes like he expected it to break. He didn't say much on the first day, just handed me the training schedule and pointed to the squad bay. "You shadow me. You learn. You speak when I ask." I did exactly that. For 3 days straight, I watched him move through the company like a surgeon, correcting posture here, tightening formation there, calling out slackers without raising his voice. He wasn't loud, but he was never ignored. One night after final formation, he pulled me aside. "You were the shooter on Givens Range, right?" I nodded once. He scratched his chin. "Didn't think so at first. Figured someone like you would have drawn more attention." "That's good. Quiet's good." I waited. Then he added, "Givens was in my squad once. He's not a bad soldier, but he's blind when it comes to change." That stayed with me. Blind when it comes to change. I knew what that meant. It wasn't just about Givens. It was about everyone like him. People clinging to an old idea of what strength looks like, of who's allowed to be excellent. That weekend, I got called into the admin office. Sergeant Major Darby handed me a printed copy of my recommendation letter, a formal Army Achievement Medal submission, citing composure under pressure and extraordinary demonstration of combat readiness under unplanned conditions. I stood there reading the letter, the words crisp and undeniable. Aria Holt, Specialist, 11B Infantry. And suddenly, it felt real. Not just because of the medal, but because now the Army couldn't pretend I was invisible. I folded the letter carefully and tucked it into the envelope with Dad's photo and note. He'd told me this would happen. "You don't need to talk your way in," he'd said. "You just have to make them realize the door was open the whole time, and they didn't see you walk through it." 2 weeks later, Sergeant Givens was gone. No announcement. No farewell. Just a quiet change on the bulletin board, reassigned to a logistics unit out in Fort Cavendish. Some said it was a routine rotation. But those of us who'd been there, who'd seen the rifle snap, who'd heard the silence after my perfect qual, we knew better. The Army doesn't broadcast internal corrections. It just moves people. The rifle he destroyed had been logged. The report of survey processed. Word was he'd be covering the replacement cost out of his base pay. But the real price wasn't the money. It was the crack in his authority. The ripple he couldn't undo. Because that day on the range, he'd tried to make me an example of failure. And I'd made him an example of limits. After he left, things at Camp Ridgewell shifted. Not all at once, but in the subtle ways that only someone living under pressure notices. Drill sergeants stopped using phrases like, "Ladies, try to keep up," during runs. The scoring on written exams stopped getting mysteriously adjusted downward for female recruits. And more than once, I caught instructors watching the women in our company with a different kind of attention, not skeptical, but evaluative. like they were finally seeing potential instead of waiting for a mistake. The other women noticed it too. During rifle drills, they stood taller. During tactics, they asked more questions. When one of them nailed a 37 out of 40 on the range a week after my qual, the response wasn't, "Not bad for a female." It was just, "Nice shooting." Progress doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers through the ranks. The girls started asking me for help, too. Not loudly, but in those quiet, end-of-day moments when most others were off calling home or sleeping. "Hey Holt, can you show me your prone setup? How do you track wind between targets?" I shared everything I knew. Not because I wanted to be the expert, but because I remembered what it felt like to have people assume you couldn't possibly be one. One night, Private Jameson, new to the cycle, came up to me during maintenance and asked the question that I knew was coming sooner or later. "Why didn't you say anything before that day on the range?" I paused, tightening a bolt on my forward assist. "Because words don't last," I said. "Performance does." He blinked, nodded, and went back to work. After lights out, I lay in my bunk, eyes on the ceiling, thinking about how strange it felt to be watched now, not as a curiosity, but as a reference point. It was never about proving I belonged. It was about making the question irrelevant. It wasn't until graduation week that I got the letter. My name had been called first during the Order of Merit announcement. Top of the cycle, 120 soldiers, and I came out number one. It earned me an automatic slot in the Leadership Development Program, a guaranteed spot at the Advanced Infantry course, and a handshake from the battalion commander during the final ceremony. But that wasn't the moment that stayed with me. The moment came later, in the barracks, after we'd all started packing for follow-on assignments. I was going through my footlocker, folding my uniforms into neat stacks, when someone called out, "Mail drop." The envelope was thick, plain, and hand-addressed. I knew the handwriting immediately. Dad. I hadn't heard from him in weeks, but that wasn't unusual. He wasn't much for phones or emails. Still lived out on the ranch in Montana, where signal came and went like mountain storms. But when he wrote, really wrote, it was for a reason. I sat on the edge of my bunk and opened it slowly. The letter inside was only 2 pages, written in his tight, all-caps script. "Arya, I got a call from a Marine buddy of mine still working down at Benning. He told me what happened. Said a female soldier shot a perfect qual with an instructor's rifle and didn't say a damn word about it. I knew it had to be you. You remember what I told you when you left? That this world isn't fair, that it won't always want to see you, but that if you held steady, if you let the work speak, there would come a day when it couldn't look away anymore. Sounds like that day came. I'm proud of you, not because you proved them wrong, but because you didn't need to yell to do it. You stayed focused. You stayed ready. And when the moment came, you did the job. That's what I taught you to do. That's what this uniform should mean. Carry it forward. Love, Dad." I folded the letter and slid it into my ruck, behind the photo I'd kept since week 1. I didn't cry. Not this time. But I sat there for a long while, letting the weight of it settle. Because no medal, no Order of Merit ranking, no speech from a sergeant major, none of that matched the feeling of reading those words in his handwriting. He taught me how to shoot, yes. But more than that, he taught me what it meant to aim true in every part of life. And now, he knew I hadn't forgotten. I left Camp Ridgewell 2 days after graduation. My orders took me to Fort Caden, an active-duty infantry post known more for rapid deployments than ceremony. I was placed into Bravo Company, 3rd Platoon, as a rifle team leader. First female in the platoon's history. No one said that directly. They didn't have to. The stairs said it loud enough. Some of the guys watched me like I was a new piece of equipment they didn't trust yet. Not hostile, just uncertain. Like they were waiting for the hitch in the system, the flaw that proved the manual wrong. But uncertainty didn't bother me. Assumption did. So I did what I always did. Head down, work clean. I met my team the morning after in processing. For soldiers, 1 specialist, 2 privates, and a corporal named Langston who'd been in for 3 years and looked at me like leadership was a joke. He said it flat out after the intro brief. "No offense, Holt, but I didn't sign up to take orders from someone who's still ironing creases in their patrol cap." I just looked at him and replied, "Good, because I give instructions, not orders. The battlefield gives the orders." That shut him up, at least for a minute. For the next 2 weeks, I learned them the way I learned wind and rifle drift. Their gait, their grip, their reload rhythm. I trained with them, ate with them, cleaned rifles with them after range days. I didn't try to outshine or overprove. I just stayed locked in, present, calm. It was during a night navigation drill that things changed. We were moving through thick underbrush under blackout conditions, navigating by red lens and memory. The trail markers had been pulled, and we were working off a vague grid reference. Typical chaos-style exercise. Langston took a bad turn and nearly led us off a ridge line. I called a halt just in time. "No way this is right," he grumbled. I knelt, checked the terrain, and recalibrated our heading. "We're off bearing by at least 15 degrees, I said. "Reset to north-northeast. There's a creek bed that'll guide us back to Checkpoint Charlie." He hesitated. Then Specialist Marin nodded. "She's right. I remember that cut from recon." We followed my route and hit the checkpoint 10 minutes early. That night, after gear was stowed, Langston walked over to my bunk. Didn't say sorry. Didn't need to. He just said, "I didn't expect you to be that squared away." I shrugged. "You weren't the only one." From that day forward, they listened when I spoke. Because I hadn't demanded authority. I had earned trust the only way that lasts, by getting it right when it counted. A month into Fort Caden, my platoon rotated through Mountain Face. It was cold, wet, and miserable. Everything that separates book soldiers from field ones. The kind of environment where fatigue carves trenches in your brain, and the only thing sharper than the wind is the need to stay functional. On the second night, we were tasked with a mock patrol through a fog-choked ridge zone, elevation nearly 3,000 feet, and visibility cut to 20 meters. The goal: locate a simulated casualty, assess, and extract without being compromised by roving OPFOR units. Most teams treated it like a checkbox exercise. I didn't. Because Dad taught me something else. When others practice like it's pretend, you practice like it's already real. Halfway up the ridge, my fire team spotted the casualty. The mannequin was dressed in full kit, placed at an awkward angle near a tree line, one leg folded under unnaturally. Langston moved in fast, but I held him back. "Perimeter sweep first," I said. He gave me a look. "It's just a dummy." "Maybe, but OPFOR likes setting bait." 10 seconds later, we caught movement behind the brush, two red-lit visors flicking in and out of the trees. "Ambush drill." Langston froze. I didn't. I tossed a flashbang sim low and called a split-team maneuver, one covering, one flanking. We cleared the space, secured the casualty, and moved out clean. Next morning, during AAR, the instructors called our name first. Fireteam Holt was the only one that identified the perimeter threat, the cadre captain said. "That's the kind of thinking that saves real lives." Langston nodded at me later over cold coffee. "I was wrong about you," he admitted. I didn't rub it in. Just told him, "I've been wrong about people too." That's how we learn. That was the day Sergeant First Class Malcolm showed up. He'd transferred from Ridgewell. I spotted him walking the training lanes in full kit, clipboard in hand, expression locked in that familiar ice-everything squint. He found me after lunch. "Still making quiet work loud?" he asked. "Trying to," I said. He handed me a sealed folder. Inside, an official nomination for Advanced Combat Leadership School, with my name already cleared by battalion. He tapped the folder once. "This isn't a gift. It's a response. You built this shot." I nodded, but he wasn't done. "And Holt?" "Yeah. Keep it up," he said, voice low. "You're starting to make it very hard for them to pretend they don't see you." By the end of my second quarter at Fort Caden, I was no longer the female team lead. I was just Holt, the one who knew the comms grid without looking, the one who pre-checked rucks before cold weather ops and always had a spare lens cloth or chem light when someone forgot theirs, the one who shot clean, moved fast, and spoke like time mattered. The change hadn't come all at once. It never does. But by then, I was getting tapped to run briefbacks, led range days, mentor newer soldiers, men and women alike, on movement drills and stress fire. Not because they were told to come to me, but because they knew I'd show them without judgment. That's what being undeniable meant. It didn't mean louder. It meant consistent. It meant when people thought someone should take charge, they looked at me without hesitation. Then one night, something strange happened. A new batch of recruits was running their first night fire exercise, and I was posted as a safety. One of the female privates, nervous, jittery, chewing on her glove, missed her first 3 targets. I walked up, crouched beside her, and quietly asked, "Want me to show you something?" She nodded fast. I adjusted her grip, helped her settle the buttstock tighter into her shoulder, whispered a rhythm to help with her breathing. Then I told her what Dad told me years ago. Let the shot come to you. Don't chase it. She hit the next 5 targets in a row. She turned to me, eyes wide, and asked, "Were you the one who shot the perfect qual at Ridgewell?" I blinked. I hadn't said a word about it here. Where'd you hear that? Word gets around, she said, smiling. It hit me right then. That story wasn't just a rumor anymore. It was becoming a reference point. A guidepost for other women trying to hold their ground in this world. Proof that skill didn't come in one shape, one tone, one walk. The next morning, I pulled Dad's letter out of my ruck and reread it for the first time in weeks. You stayed focused. You stayed ready. And when the moment came, you did the job. I traced the edge of the paper with my thumb. Because I knew now, it was never about the range or the medal or even the rifle. It was about being prepared when the world turned and all the lights pointed at you. Not to show off, but to show up. A few months later, I deployed. Not a high-visibility mission, just one of the quiet ones, out in a stretch of terrain where names didn't matter as much as grid coordinates. We rotated through checkpoints, ran dismounted patrols, secured roads no one remembered building. Same dirt, different skyline. My team ran smooth. Langston had become my right hand. Marin got promoted. We worked like a unit that didn't need to yell to function. It was in that space, between the routine and the unknown, that I found myself one night, crouched behind a crumbled wall with a local interpreter and a squad leader pinned down 50 meters out. Enemy fire from a ridgeline we didn't expect. Night vision washed everything green and ghostly. Langston keyed up over comms. They're stuck. Return fire's not getting through. I scanned the ridge, heart steady, fingers tracing the grip of my M4. Found the flash, brief, faint, just above a notch in the rocks. One shooter. High angle. Trained. I shifted into prone, nestled the rifle against a chunk of concrete, and settled into position. Everything else disappeared, just like it had on that range back in Ridgewell. Wind steady. Hold adjusted. Trigger smooth. The shot cracked once. The flash didn't return. Target down. Langston confirmed a few seconds later. We're moving. No medals came for that shot. No camera caught it. But I knew what it meant. It wasn't just cover fire. It was full circle. It was that voice in my head, Dad's voice, saying, "This is why I taught you." When we rotated back to base that night, I unfolded his letter again, the corners soft and worn. Then I added a line of my own to the bottom of the page. I stood my ground. The shot was clean. The work spoke. Because that's what it had always been about. Not proving I belonged, but reminding everyone, including myself, that I always did. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.